Mozambique. Just crossed over from Tanzania. Border crossing went smoothly, no problems. Rode through town, found an ATM that actually worked, got cash, and then planned to ride outside of town and then camp off in the jungle somewhere. I thought I found a decent campsite, like end of a vacant field where there was road construction equipment. It was the weekend and evening, so nobody was around. Just walked out, set up my tent hour or two before dark, and then right as it was getting dark, a bunch of villagers with machetes and bow and arrows show up. They were quite upset that I was there. Luckily, I spoke a little bit of Portuguese, so I could communicate, saying like, "Oh, I'm just camping, just a tourist, going to head south in the morning, no problem." They were very, very angry. They had their bows and arrows pointed at me, and then their leader had a machete, kept on raising his hand as if he was threatening to strike me with the machete. And they ended up telling me to leave my stuff there and just walk out with them towards the road. I just sat out there for a while they pretty much discussed my fate.
Welcome to the Seek Travel Ride podcast, where we share the stories and experiences of people who have undertaken amazing adventures by bike. Whether it's crossing state borders, mountain ranges, countries or continents, we want to share that spirit of adventuring on two wheels with our listeners. Hello, I'm your host Bella Malloy, and I'm very excited to introduce my guest for today's episode of Seek Travel Ride, Jacob Ashton. 108 countries, 6 continents, 163,000 kilometres. These are the numbers and statistics which you can draw from Jacob's accumulated bike travel. But condensing journeys like the one he's taken into simple numbers is such a disservice. Glossing over experiences with a tally of kilometres pedalled, countries entered and continents traversed can't ever go into the details of what it's like to actually live and breathe this lifestyle for so long. Jacob's bike tour is indeed impressive. His first trip was a 4-year journey spanning from 2016 to 2020. Now, the numbers from that adventure alone are mind-blowing to me. 100 countries, over 124,000 kilometres across 6 continents. But for me, again, the real questions go deeper. What were those experiences like? What's it like to be immersed in new cultures and discover new landscapes in this way for so long? What's it like to live on the road day after day, year after year? Does the motivation wane, or does the variation offered by slow travel mean that living in any other way is no longer really an option? What about when things don't go to plan? When you get sick, require hospitalisation, surgery even? How do you fund a lifestyle of perpetual travel? Then there's the mental load. Being comfortable with your own company is one thing, but what's it like to be away from your own community, your friends, your family for so long? Now, no podcast session will ever be long enough to fully wrap our heads around Jacob's accumulated experiences since 2016, but I am nonetheless looking forward to gaining insights from a long-time traveller and seeing if we can get some answers to these deeper questions today. Jacob, welcome to the show.
Hi, Bella. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming on. It's like a real big gift for me, Jacob, to be able to speak to someone with as much experience as you've had. So many bike adventures now for multiple years. And as I mentioned in the intro, my mind almost explodes at the ideas of the questions I could ask you. But listeners to the show will know the question I start my show with, and I ask this of all my guests, is, Jacob, do you remember the very first bike you ever rode?
Maybe. Remember the sensation of being on like the really small bike, having that feeling that I could finally ride without the training wheels. Probably one of my earliest memories. Hard to say if I actually remember the bike. Probably find it in one of my parents' pictures somewhere.
Are you a only child? Do you have brothers and sisters? Is there a chance the bike was a hand-me-down, or was it a new bike to you?
I'm the oldest of 5, so 1 brother and 3 sisters, so I think I got the new one.
Well, I'm one of 6, and I'm the 5th youngest, so I'm sort of like the other end of your spectrum. I never got the new one. It didn't matter, though. They always felt new when you got them. But that sensation, like you said, it's your earliest memory. It's quite interesting how something like propulsion on 2 wheels is something that takes you back that far, because you've come so far on two wheels, or actually two wheels, I say, but the first part of your world tour, that was actually on a recumbent, wasn't it? Now, is that technically three wheels or is it still two wheels?
That one was still two wheels. Started out on the recumbents. Yeah, had some back problem. Yeah, still two wheels.
Do you ever miss the recumbent? Like, do you ever miss that style of riding? I've never ridden one, but I imagine it's very different to an upright traditional sort of touring bike.
Yeah, it's an incredibly fun bike to ride. It's amazingly comfortable. The only thing that really got tired on that one was my legs. But the downside for me was that tend to be a much more introverted person, and that bike creates a lot of attention. So it doesn't matter where you are, what country, everybody wants to stop and say hi and see what's going on.
I actually came across that because now, listeners, you're going to want to dig into the full part of Jacob's story. And the great thing is it is available in blog form on the Crazy Guy on a Bike website. And I will provide a link to Jacob's specific blog about this tour in there. But you've got a section about your gear there. And I think it's entitled something like The Bikes. This is sort of getting out of control now because I think, are you up to bike number 6?
That sounds right. Yeah, I rode bike number 6 for a while, going to Alaska. And when I had to restart at some point from Idaho, then ended up going back to what was bike number 5. That's still mostly in service with about 50,000 kilometers on it.
The stories that bike could say. But what I was going to get to was when I was reading about that, one of the anecdotes you did say was the benefit of trading in the recumbent when it needed to be replaced and going to a touring style bike was that all of a sudden you didn't get as much attention from strangers and from outsiders. Was it an unexpected surprise that a recumbent would get so much attention, or was it all part of the course?
Didn't actually occur to me at all that a recumbent would be get more attention than a normal bike. It was really a shock when I started riding it. For a while it was kind of cool, but then the novelty wore off pretty quickly. And I really enjoyed the anonymity of the quote-unquote normal bike after I switched.
Let's get away from equipment for a bit of time here and actually get into the details of this tour even coming to being. We talked about your first bike memory. We've talked about some of the bikes you've ridden now. But why the decision to travel in this manner in the first place? I read on your blog your tour started, not long after your 24th birthday. Prior to setting off, the longest you'd ever ridden in a row was 3 days. How do you go from 3 days of touring to all of a sudden what's amounted to now, thousands and thousands of kilometres later? How do you even come up with this idea?
I started out with the basic idea that I wanted to travel. At the time I had that idea, I wasn't sure what form that would take. I actually thought of sailing around the world for a while, but then had the realization that the world is about 70% water, so decided against that one. Been riding bikes for about 20 years now as a hobby, just doing it for fun. Did some racing when I was younger, that kind of thing, and it's just been my passion and main hobby for that time. So I ended up randomly discovering bike travel, or like the idea that you could travel by bike through a friend, and then ended up going out on just weekend trips. The first one I did, I think I just strapped a sleeping bag to my road bike and didn't bring a sleeping mat, which was a mistake because it was cold out.
You only make that mistake once.
Yeah, quite cold out, but ended up riding out somewhere quiet, camping under the stars, and just had a really challenging, uncomfortable, but ended up being an amazing experience, and was pretty much hooked on the idea from there. And the plan originally started with riding the Pan American, the length of the Americas. That was something I'd heard about that people do on motorcycles. That was another form that was glossed over in favor of the bike travel, at least from the affordability perspective. Much cheaper to travel by bike. And then it kind of started building from there. Like, oh, I want to ride the Pan American. Oh, I want to go see Europe too. Well, Asia looks nice. What about Africa and Australia? Yeah, I'm just going to do the whole world if I can manage it.
There's not many countries that you haven't gone to. As I said in my intro, I sort of hinted that there's superficial questions I could easily get into with you, and I'm unashamedly going to ask you one now. Like, do you actually have a favourite country, and B, is there a country you haven't been to yet which you are really, really keen to go and experience?
For favorites, I usually like to give a top three. And right now, those will run probably with Peru, Nepal, and Namibia. That kind of gives a basic idea of those. It's kind of like the mountain deserts, really empty landscapes that I've really, really enjoyed in the past. Nepal isn't quite as empty, but it is home to the most incredible mountains in the world, the Himalayas, of course. So that one was a really amazing country to cycle. And then as for a country I'm really looking forward to cycling, might actually be able to hit that one later this year. We're currently in Dushanbe, Tajikistan, and working our way around Central Asia, cycling with my partner, Carolyn, and hoping to go to Mongolia later this summer. Hopefully make it to there. That's a country that's been on my list for quite a long time, and for much the same reason as the other ones. It's just very empty landscapes, the least densely populated country in the world. I find that very appealing.
It is interesting, though, when you rattle off the three countries that you love the most, Peru, Nepal and Namibia, it is stark, big, impressive landscapes. I guess Namibia would be, my vision of Namibia is hot, open, vast expanses as well. The desert of Namibia, it sort of goes right to the coast as well, doesn't it?
Yes, Namibia does have a coast. Didn't make it to the coast when I went through there. Spent most of my time in the Namib Desert, heading south from Windhoek, the capital, on dirt roads when I was riding car to Cape Town.
Was it something that you knew about yourself before you set off, that these isolated, big, massive landscapes were the ones that would energize you the most?
I'm not sure. Don't think I had as much of the opportunity to do that in that way, at least. I did do lots of training, just general riding around for growing up cycling. Always enjoyed cycling in the mountains, but I don't think it quite resonated with me the same way doing day rides as compared to doing long tours.
I can totally understand that. I've had that same feel myself. I mean, obviously putting my hand up, I've not toured in any manner like you have, but I often feel if I'm climbing a mountain on a loaded bike, I feel like I've earned the views just that little bit more. And it's not like I haven't earned them any other time I've cycled, but I guess I'm definitely going slower and I appreciate them even more as well. I feel more immersed in my surroundings that way. And I imagine that's possibly similar to that feeling that you were describing there as well, the point of difference. It's not like, you knew you liked mountains, but you're experiencing them in a totally different manner now.
Yeah, touring has been a much more immersive experience where a day ride, most of them had been from home at that point. Hadn't really done much traveling around apart from racing and stuff like that. At that point, it's just kind of a in and out thing. Like I would ride up into the mountains, enjoy the scenery, and then back home in time for dinner or something like that. Not quite the same level of immersion where most of the time riding into the mountains on the touring bike can end up camping somewhere in them as well.
Let's go back. I understand your motivations. You want to travel, you want to see more of the world. You've decided the bicycle is the perfect form of transport to do this. It's a more affordable way of doing this as well. How long from having the concept of travelling in this way to actually, setting off on that day one did you have? Did this idea manifest and it took a couple of years to build up to leaving, or did it manifest and within a matter of weeks you were setting off?
It was more of a multi-year thing. At the time, I was working far too many hours at a pretty menial job and just kind of daydreaming of traveling at that point. And with that time to think, began kind of developing plans from there, playing with different ideas. And it ended up having a departure date for close to 2 years before I actually started.
Wow, that's a lot of time to think about the sort of things you might experience along the way. I can appreciate that when you travel in this way, you experience and see things you never knew even existed at times, right? But when you've got 2 years building up to it, did you do a lot of research? Like, were there milestones in your mind of, I cannot wait to go and see this place for myself? Or were you on Google Street View, checking out where you might ride and things like that? Like, what sort of detail did your route planning go into?
There was quite a bit of planning and just research, I guess. And a lot of my time off work was spent just doing internet research, poring over maps and trying to figure out where the places to go in different countries are. The first leg was going south home from Idaho and riding down the length of the Americas southbound. I remember quite specifically there was this one location in Peru. It's in Huascarán National Park, not too far away from the city of Juarez. And there's a pass there, I think it's called Punta Olímpica. And I remember seeing that one very specifically on Street View, just being this winding dirt road that goes back and forth through the Andes. And at the top, you come through this pass, and it looks, from Street View, it looked so narrow that I could probably stand in the middle and put my hands out and touch both sides. Coming to see that as a reality some amount of time later was really incredible because it really, really lived up and probably even exceeded expectations. It was one of my favorite places I've ever been.
I can only imagine what it's like to be somewhere you've dreamt of for so long for yourself. I've mentioned before I have a passion of photography. Like, part of the reason why I love being on my bike is seeing the landscapes, and my mind composes photos every single bike ride I go. Don't necessarily take them, but I think about them. And something that's always occurred to me, it doesn't matter what a photo looks like, it never portrays that sense of depth, that perception of depth and grandeur and size doesn't seem to come. And I imagine that's sort of what you were talking about there, you know, from an image you feel like you can touch either side of the road, but being there yourself, it's just this big, massive space, this big place to be feeling so itty-bitty small in.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, 2 years to plan and working your way from Idaho all the way down the Americas, that's a fairly substantial trip. I guess the question I want to ask is, when you left, were you expecting just to finish at the tip of South America, that would be it? Or had you already started thinking, initially that was the dream, but you'd already knew by the time you left that you wanted to keep going and see every place in the world almost by bike?
Yeah, when I left, I had the plan of it being a world tour. A little bit different perspective that way. Also a little bit different mindset of just kind of saying, okay, this is my life now. Just kind of coming to grips with that reality for as long as it lasted.
8 years beyond that first pedal stroke. You've done so much travel in there, and I realise there's been points in time where you haven't necessarily been on this world tour. But do you find that you ever contemplate your life being different? Do you ever think about not being on the road, not doing what you're doing now? Have you had moments where the motivation to keep travelling in this manner haven't really been there?
A little bit. Most of the time it's unsurprisingly gone with when things go very, very poorly.
Let's go there, because I think that's a barrier for why people don't do things, is sometimes things that you don't want to happen when you're away. What unexpected things from that perspective, from things that you don't want to go wrong, what have those impacts been for you that have questioned continuing on?
Yeah, so the first major one was about 10 months into my trip. Ended up being October-ish 2016. When I started out, I had the bright idea of trying to combine mountain climbing and cycling. I did one climb in Mexico that went quite well. Climbed Perpetual, tallest volcano in North America. And I had planned to do more climbing going south, but it didn't work out for whatever reason. And my second, and what ended up being my final climb, going up Ojos del Salado on the Chile-Argentina border. It's the second tallest mountain in South America and the tallest volcano in the world. 6,854 meters, if I remember it correctly. That climb didn't go well. I ended up coming up close to the summit, or on my way up, had my glove rip open on my right hand and exposed my middle finger of my right hand to the cold weather. My best estimates for the temperature are about at least 40 degrees below 0 Celsius, wind chill. Average summit temperature was running like negative 25 Celsius, and winds ended up being estimated 150 to 200 kilometers per hour, so very, very bad. You really shouldn't be climbing in those conditions, but I had the summit fever going. Ended up getting severe frostbite on that finger, middle finger of my right hand. The best visual of that, what it looked like, is as if you put like a sausage on a skewer and stuck it in the fire for too long and it came out all black and blistered. That's what it looked like. And of course, it was also incredibly painful. It wasn't really the incident itself that made me question that. I ended up losing the finger, getting it amputated a couple weeks after, and that was kind of the thing of where my own mortality kind of struck me of, oh, this, maybe I'm not invincible after all. That was the first time I feel like I really questioned whether I wanted to continue doing that or even be out there traveling that way in the first place. With that, overcoming that was a bit of a process. I ended up being in the hospital for 3 days, so once again, a lot of time to think. The scenario I was running through in my head was just kind of thinking like, oh, well, what if I did quit? Okay, hop on the plane. There's an airport not too far away. Go back home. Everybody feels sorry for me for a while. And then got to find something else to do. That really wasn't that appealing to me. I'd enjoyed everything else to a certain extent. Of course, there are other bad days that don't have to be that severe. Just didn't like what quitting would bring, so decided to keep going. And of course, I'm very, very glad I did.
You said you lost your finger. Was it the middle finger? Like, where are we talking about here? Like, how much of your finger have you got left?
Yeah, almost exactly half of the middle finger. You have the two knuckles away from the finger. In between those two, it's like the fingertip, one knuckle back, and then in the middle of that next joint is where it's lost.
And I guess a visual reminder forever of that day. Can I ask, Jacob, were you were you into mountaineering and stuff before you actually decided to climb up there? Like, you were mentioning the height there. It's very, very significant when you're in a frostbite zone. Were you into this, or was it, again, just your love for being in those remote, isolated places took you up there?
Didn't do as much as I should have beforehand. I'd climbed Mount Whitney in California, but that was about it. Probably shouldn't have been up there in the first place. Did do quite a fair amount of research, and I don't know, probably still a bad decision. But hard to say I regret doing it because I had been carrying the mountain climbing equipment on my bike for about 20,000 kilometers at that point.
It's like the full kit, like an ice axe and all that type of stuff?
I had an ice axe, I had climbing boots, I had too many clothes. Bike was really, really heavy.
No wonder it broke.
Exactly. Yeah, after the incident, I sent a whole bunch of stuff home. That was kind of the beginning. Well, not really beginning. It started cutting back well before that.
Yeah, and in terms of cutting back, I should point out to my listeners, like, if we were to look at your setup now, you're not on a recumbent bike, so there's that stark difference. But you are really, when I look at it, it's a typical bikepacking type setup, right?
Yeah, something like that. Got the handlebar bag, got a frame bag, and then have a bag on the rear rack. So, yeah, bike packing or hybrid setup, something like that. Don't really matters the terminology that much.
No, we don't need to get into the whole what's cycle touring, what's bike packing sort of rabbit warren either. But I guess it's the benefit of travelling for so long that you are refining how you travel. You're making different decisions on what's necessary to take with you to travel as well. It's the beauty of that experience that's coming to fore there.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of that is doing my best to time arrival in different places at the correct time. Don't want to be too far north or too far south at the wrong time of year. Done pretty well at avoiding that so far. Been a little bit different touring with a partner. I'm carrying slightly more than I was on my own, partly because just for extra comfort in cold weather, that kind of thing.
What sort of extremes are you comfortable with travelling to and being in and camping in as well? Obviously, you're not camping in -40 like you were talking about there when you were mountaineering, but what sort of temperatures are you fairly comfortable that, okay, I don't mind being in a place when it's going to be this cold, or I'm comfortable knowing that I can survive when it's this hot? Do you know what your extreme temperature survival sort of thing for personal comfort are?
So for cold temperatures, right now we'd be pretty well set up down to about -10 degrees Celsius. Anything more than that, we'd want to carry more gear. For hot temperatures, I've had the misfortune to cycle when it was above 50 degrees Celsius on a couple occasions. Once in Sudan, where I ended up there in the summer, again in the Australian outback, where confirmed temperature is at 52 degrees Celsius.
Oh, disgusting. Jacob, the benefit of all the experience you've gained is you know that that's something you need to pre-plan for. You know that you need to understand where you're going to be at what time of the year, what the weather's going to be like there. So in a way, that's possibly dictated your route.
Yes, definitely. Starting out for the tour, I started in Idaho in February, so it was quite cold then, but during mountain climbing equipment, so at that point, that cold wasn't that big of a problem. Planned that one quite well to where it warmed up after about a week, and then ended up crossing the equator in Ecuador, actually, on what would be the summer solstice in the northern hemisphere, or around that time in late June, and ended up arriving in Ushuaia, the southern end of South America, right before the winter solstice in December. Yeah, I've been able to hop back and forth pretty well, where I had a springtime in Europe after that. Yeah, even with this tour, spent the winter in South India, and now we're up here in Central Asia.
How does the complexities of managing things like border crossings and visas come into this as well? Because I imagine there's times where you're in countries, you've got a limited allowance of time to be in that country. So travelling through those distances would have an impact on a touring schedule as well?
Yes. Yeah, when I was traveling my own on my world tour, it wasn't really a problem as I refined my setup more to be lighter weight and faster. I very rarely had to keep track of visa schedules. The only place where that really came into play was in Europe in the Schengen zone, since there's such a large area there. And as non-citizens, we get about 90 days at a time.
Europe is also a place a lot of tourists go through quickly. One, because of visa restrictions, but two, because it's not a cheap place to be touring often.
Yeah. For my second leg in Europe on my world tour, I ended up going 4.5 months without paying for accommodation, without paying for a place to sleep.
Wow.
That was going through Europe. I think I paid for a hostel in south of Spain, bought a solar panel, a sporting goods shop out there, so I wouldn't have to be reliant on charging stuff. And then didn't pay anything for, yeah, it ended up being almost exactly 4.5 months until I stayed at a hostel in Moldova 135 days later.
That actually brings me to sort of another question that I have. And it's a question a lot of listeners have as well when they hear about people who've travelled for years at a time this way, is affording to travel for years at a time this way. One of them would be, you must have an overall budget or an allowance. Like, do you have like an average daily allowance that you allow yourself to spend? Typically, I can understand wild camping is a great way of saving costs on not spending on accommodation, but how have you factored in being able to afford to travel like this?
Yeah, for my first big tour, my budget was $20 a day, US. Of course, we've experienced inflation since then, so things may have changed slightly. But that worked out to roughly $15 a day for living expenses, and with the remaining $5, 25% ended up going to bike parts, visas, and other stuff. And for the most part, I was able to stick to that budget quite well. What really drove it into the ground was having medical problems and bikes breaking.
Mm.
I did fine with the day-to-day, month-to-month stuff. It was just when the big expenses popped up, it really fit into my budget a lot. My original plan when I left was actually going for 4.5 to 7 years on the money I had saved, and ended up being pretty broke right at 4 years. So quite fortunately timed to when nobody was really able to travel in spring of 2020.
You mentioned there when things don't go to plan, they're the most expensive ones as well. Do you even have like travel insurance for this type of travel? Or would anyone cover, a long-term travel this way?
Yeah, for the first one, I didn't. I was really struggling with that, trying to find something that would cover it. A lot of companies that I was reading have stipulations that say if you go above a certain altitude, say 5,000 meters, your policy is invalid, or if you are doing certain activities, like even cycling is often included on there, is it often being invalid. So I didn't have travel insurance the first time. Not sure it would have helped since I was cycling after all, but the biggest health related expenses ended up not being because of cycling. The worst one was needing an emergency appendectomy, appendix removal in Pretoria in South Africa. That one just appeared quite suddenly one morning, having the problems, and I had to go into the hospital, and that surgery cost me about a year's worth of my budget.
Whoa.
Yeah.
And also, you've had some complications since that surgery to do with that as well, since, haven't you?
Yeah. Yeah. So I had that one early 2018, I think. And about a year later, I was in Tajikistan. Yeah. 2019 was going through Tajikistan along the Pamir Highway in a small town village called Korog. Ended up being very, very sick then, and also needed another emergency surgery as well for a bowel obstruction, which was related to the appendectomy. It's something like a 1 in 200 chance that just genetically my body produces more scar tissue. So scar tissue buildup in my intestines ended up creating a blockage. Had to get surgery to have that blockage fixed.
Is that something that you're likely going to have to continue having? Or you don't know? No one knows?
Good question. I've had 4 or 5 more surgeries since 2020, or since I came back. As of right now, my last surgery was in late July 2022. Almost 2 years now, which is actually the longest time I've gone without needing surgery since I've started needing them.
You know, you hinted earlier, Jacob, that it was when you went through that incident on the mountain in South America, you know, you ended up losing a finger to frostbite. That was when you contemplated whether to continue on. Have these surgeries that you've had, first your appendectomy and then, you know, the bowel instruction surgeries to remove the scar tissue, have they given you pause for reconsidering this mode of travel again in that similar way?
Yes, the appendectomy one actually went really smoothly, surprisingly. Ended up riding myself to the hospital in Pretoria and getting checked out there. And they did all the testing, got the surgery. It was, apart from being horrendously expensive, well, expensive on a relative scale to my touring budget, the process went really well. So that one destroyed my plans to cycle up the west coast of Africa. Instead of doing that, I ended up deciding to fly from Pretoria to Morocco. My plan before had been to cycle, but because of the cut in the money, decided if I was going to skip one section, it would be to skip that section, hopefully not have to compromise elsewhere, even like still didn't go to plan. The bowel obstruction in Tajikistan was another big one. Actually, ended up texting one of the people I met on the Pamir Highway who was checking in on me. It was a British guy I met, Ollie, and he was texting me asking how I was doing. I'd actually texted him and told him I was done, that I was quitting, calling it, deciding I was done at that point. And he ended up being able to come and visit me in the hospital a few days later. I'd changed my mind and decided I wanted to keep going. From that one, though, I did end up flying home to recover. I have a very large scar on my stomach, about 20 centimeters long, wrapping around my belly button on my stomach from that one. There were other problems of the scar, the incision, I should say, splitting open at that. So it ended up being just a really, really big, nasty scar. And it took more than 2 months for it to close up completely. So I ended up flying home to recover and then restarting again, riding to Alaska to try to make it back to Tajikistan.
My mind sort of just boggles at having to deal with those sort of issues far away from you. Sort of thankful that your friend came to visit you in hospital. It seemed to change your mind. But I wonder, you know, you've travelled in this manner, Jacob, now for on and off for the last 8 years. The pull of the road and the pull of curiosity to keep exploring in this way, do you find it's still as strong now as when you first set off?
Hard to say. It's absolutely what I want to be doing. Hard to say if the strength really varies. I think on this tour, it's been going for actually almost exactly a year now. About another week or so away from that, touring in Asia with my partner Carolyn. And the way we've been touring is much different than it was last time, and that we're more trying to explore places than get places. So we ended up doing all sorts of silly things. If you looked at our route through India, it's a little bit crazy. We ended up doing like the big lap around India, about 15,000 kilometers just in India alone, and more riding in circles, exploring places where before it was more of a getting places to a degree. Last time I fell into the trap of time really was money. Everything is dwindling with each passing day. Quite literal sense. Doing a little bit better this time and trying to ignore it when that's happening. Just riding at a different pace right now. Hard to say if it's the same.
There's differences in the way that you were travelling now to what you were doing when you first started as well. So it's not fair to compare them. They're two very different things, but just that notion of you want to explore places rather than get places, I absolutely love that. Was that something that came to you instantly when you started travelling with your partner Carolyn there, or is that something that's just morphed in time?
It was something I wanted to do, I guess, when I was doing it on my own. If you look at the routing I took, there's a pretty good map that gives you an overview on the blog there. And if you're able to glance at that, none of it is really ever going anywhere directly for a select few points, of course. Like there's a general course. But this time it's much more meandering, where instead of saying, oh, we have the summer to cross Central Asia, it's more thinking along the lines of, oh, we have the summer to explore Central Asia and ride these routes. And a good example of that would be our routes here in Tajikistan. We're planning to ride all three of the major valleys. Most people, when they're coming through here, just choose one. There's the Wakhan Valley, the M41, the main road through the Pamir, and then the Bartong. And instead of going straight through, would have been what I would have done the last time. I'm probably just riding the Wakhan. We're planning to go up the Wakhan, down the Pamir, and then back up the Bartong to eventually cross into Kyrgyzstan. Try to see as much as possible instead of just picking whatever feels like the best route at the time.
We mentioned before I press record, and you mentioned, like, I'm speaking to you while you're in Dushanbe now, and you've been there before, so there's this weird sense of deja vu, but I guess you're touring so differently now that there's a sense that you're discovering things fresh as well.
Somewhat, I think. Trying to look back on the mentality I had the last time, I was still trying to do my best to slow down and enjoy it. Ended up riding much of the way from Dushanbe to Korog with some other cyclists that I met. This being arguably one of the best cycle touring routes in the world. I'd already planned to try to slow down and experience it. Not sure where to go with that one, kind of like mixed feelings on there, I guess.
Hi everyone, just taking a little quick break from the interview there to say a huge hello and welcome to all of you who have just newly discovered Seek Travel Ride. Recently there's been a lot of new followers and fans of the show tune into some episodes, and it struck me that with a podcast that is now over a year and a half long in releasing weekly episodes, you've got quite a lot of guest stories to catch up on. I definitely invite you to take the time after this episode to look at the back catalogue, scroll through and find out some more stories that you may enjoy listening to. We have guests going on bikepacking adventures across countries and continents, others who are cycle touring for years at a time, going all around the world, and yet more guests who are pushing the limits in the space of ultra-endurance cycling and seeing what is possible in events such as the Tour Divide and the Transcontinental, as well as many, many more. No matter the journey, no matter the age, we have some interesting guest stories in amongst that episode list, and I'm pretty proud to say that in that guest listing now, there are over 50 women featured. So for those of you checking out for some solo female inspiration, there are more than 50 amazing women to choose from to listen to. Lastly, if you are enjoying listening to Seek Travel Ride and you want to support the show, the easiest way to do so is to click the Buy Me a Coffee link, which you will see in the podcast show notes. That helps to keep my microphone turned on and me producing these weekly episodes for you as well. Okay, there's enough of that now. Let's get back to the episode. What about the other aspects of touring longer term? And I'm not talking specifically now where you are with Carolyn, but when you did set off with the principle of travelling the world slowly, discovering it on a bike, there are long stretches of that where you are, I guess, your own company for so long. You mentioned at the start of the show you're an introvert, and so you're obviously comfortable with your own company, but are there times where you feel alone, like a sense of loneliness, a sense of missing companionship with family and friends and community as well?
Somewhat. For me, just the way my mentality, who I am as a person, generally quite comfortable in my own company. The longest I've gone without actually seeing anybody ended up being the mountain climb where I got the frostbite and later needed the amputation. Didn't see any kind of life, human, animal, or otherwise, for about 4 days. And that one, the sense of being alone was really there. But I think that's quite different from actually feeling lonely. Some of the places where I would say I've wanted companionship of some kind, or even just talking to people in general, would have been going through Africa, East Africa in particular. Just the area is quite populated, so a lot of the time basically surrounded by people. In Kenya, quite a few people speak English, so can have conversations with people to a degree, but it's quite often just the very shallow interactions of getting asked the same dozen or so questions many, many times per day. So where are you from? Where are you going? That kind of thing. And whenever I started feeling that way, like just really wanted to talk to people in some capacity, ended up trying to find a hostel or something in a more touristed area and just trying to meet other travelers. And then usually after staying somewhere like that for a couple of days, that would be enough to fulfill my personal need for socialization. I was ready to go back out into the bush again.
What about on the flip side? You do have friends and family, that aren't with you every time that you're touring. And I realise we live in a great world with technology where we can be in contact with loved ones. But what do you feel the perspective of your inner circle, friends and family, is of you travelling like this?
For the most part, everybody's been generally quite accepting. My parents have a tendency, whenever I call, to ask me when I'm coming home. When I was traveling on my own, I'd try to call home, talk to somebody fairly regularly, like probably once a week on average, unless I was somewhere where there was poor cell service or internet connection, that kind of thing. But also different from perhaps some of the other people who started touring much earlier than I have. And all of my touring has been done in the internet age. 2016 onwards, it's been quite easy to be able to video call home and see people, talk to people to a degree. Haven't had that as much. And then now traveling with a partner, my parents are a bit upset because I only call them about once a month now because I have somebody to talk to all the time. And Carolyn's parents are actually more happy because she tends to call whenever I do. That was apparently more frequently than she used to.
It is another question which people do have as well, is the ability to stay connected. I'm always surprised that, I think this is interview number 80 that I've conducted, which FYI everyone, pretty proud of here. But it blows my mind the places where I speak to people. I'm speaking to you from Tajikistan. You're obviously connected well now and you're staying somewhere where you're connected. But getting into a country and finding out things like how do things work, getting access to a SIM card, getting access to money, finding out just even where to buy food from. Have you found that you've developed a routine to that? When people are thinking of this type of travel, sometimes these are the questions and the barriers which maybe make them feel too uneasy to think about how they would go in those scenarios. What about you with your experience?
Yeah, so there's something of a routine now. In countries with less consistent internet access, pretty much just outside the Western world, areas where there's a good probability of staying in hotels on at least a semi-regular basis, or that would be getting a SIM card, and that's generally quite cheap. For example, here in Tajikistan, we ended up spending about $10 US on 50 gigabytes of data. That's good for a month. In India, it was also quite cheap. I think it was like $3 or $4 for roughly the same amount of data. In many of these countries, it's quite cheap to have the cell service and stuff. And then, yeah, same thing with getting money. For the most part, finding an ATM and withdrawing cash is generally quite easy. Have been a couple times this trip, just a month or so ago, when we crossed from China into Kyrgyzstan. We specifically brought some Chinese yuan to be able to trade, and we traded an amount by the border and then carried on riding. And we hoped to be able to get to the ATM in the next town. And I think there was only one ATM in town in Saritash, and it didn't work. So we rode into town with about $7 or $8 US with us, and the weather was beginning to turn. It was forecasted for like rain and snow and stuff. So we're thinking like, oh, we'll get a guest house or something like that, wait it out. But the ATM didn't work. So instead of going out for a hot meal and retreating to a guest house, we ended up buying instant noodles and sausage at the small shop there and cooking our own food outside the shop, and then carrying on riding until we could get to a lower elevation where luckily it was, well, it wasn't snow, it was sleet instead, and a quite cold ride the next day until we got to the ATM and the town after that. It doesn't always go according to plan, but for the most part, it's not too difficult to get information on where you can expect to find cash or be able to trade money at the borders, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that anecdote of it doesn't always go according to plan. I often say with a lot of my guests, some of the best tales of adventure come from the unplanned, unexpected moments of perhaps we would call them misadventure. I realise, Jacob, I feel it's a cheeky question to ask you because you've got so many of these probably to recall after 8 years of this type of experience. But if I was to ask you the cheeky, impossible question of tell me about an unexpected moment and how you dealt with that, what sort of things would you be able to talk about? What moment would you tell me? You can take your time figuring this out, by the way, because it's a big question.
Yeah, oh boy. There's been a lot going unexpectedly over that time. Yeah. More recently, we were cycling in Nepal and riding through a small area in the mountains, and there was some rain overnight. And in Nepal, that often means landslides. And we have a route planned out going one way, and we get to where the road is supposed to be, and there's just a big hole like 6 or 8 meters deep, and the road is just gone, washed away from the landslides the previous evening. Lucky for us, we're on bikes, but there were several cars on either side, like a bunch of people sitting around waiting, hoping that the heavy machinery will show up and remake the road. But for us on bikes, we were able to cross with some help from the locals, dragging our bikes down into the hole and back out again by some kind of human ladder chain. It was quite entertaining. Be one of the more recent ones. Riding into the wrong areas, getting held at gunpoint here and there. There was one that happened in Egypt. I was riding the Sinai Peninsula, which is a generally unstable area. Disclaimer, you probably shouldn't ride there, but of course I did anyway. I was riding into a town looking for a restaurant or like a supermarket or something. And like, oh, there's a police station. I'll go ask them. And so I started riding up a little hill up to the police station. And one of the officers didn't think I was a tourist and ran out yelling with his gun pointed at me, and stopped immediately and put my hands up. Stop, what are you doing here? At least that's what I would assume they were saying. I don't speak Arabic. There are restaurants, a supermarket, and the officer with the gun at me and all the other officers had a good laugh and then pointed me off in the right direction. There was Other things, very interesting first impressions of a country. One would be in Mozambique. Just crossed over from Tanzania. Border crossing went smoothly, no problems. Rode through town, found an ATM that actually worked, got cash, and then planned to ride outside of town and then camp off in the jungle somewhere. I thought I found a decent campsite, like end of a vacant field where there was road construction equipment. It was the weekend and evening, so nobody was around. Just walked out, set up my tent hour or two before dark, and then right as it was getting dark, a bunch of villagers with machetes and bow and arrows show up. They were quite upset that I was there. Luckily, I spoke a little bit of Portuguese, so I could communicate, saying like, "Oh, I'm just camping, just a tourist, going to head south in the morning, no problem." They were very, very angry. They had their bows and arrows pointed at me, and then their leader had a machete, kept on raising his hand as if he was threatening to strike me with the machete. And they ended up telling me to leave my stuff there and just walk out with them towards the road. I just sat out there for a while they pretty much discussed my fate. It was what it seemed like. They switched to their local language, so I couldn't understand what was going on. 20, 30 minutes later, the police show up, and one of them spoke English, which was very helpful. Portuguese isn't that great. He starts talking to me. He's like, "Oh, the villagers here saw you, and they think you're a spy. What are you doing here?" I didn't want to say that I was camping out because the hotels were $30 a night, and I didn't want to pay for them, so I did the better answer and said, like, "Oh, it's a nice night out. I enjoy the nature," and that kind of thing. "Well, what are you doing? Why didn't you get a hotel?" Like, "Yeah, it was just nice sleeping under the stars and heading south in the morning. This is my plan, going that way." Like, "Oh, well, if you're not a spy and you're not a terrorist or anything like that, then you're a very strange man." And I ended up riding with them back to town, and they let me camp at the police station. And then I was free to go in the morning, and turned out the problem was that there was actually a civil war going on that I didn't know about. So the accusation of being a spy would have been quite serious, but luckily it turned out all right.
Listeners, if you could have just seen my face while Jacob was sharing that story, I was mouth wide open, hands on my head, just aghast. And Jacob, fair play to you. Some of you may have actually recognised Jacob's voice before this episode started, and it's because I've featured Jacob as a episode of Cycle Shorts, our little midweek mini episodes where people share one day of their trip. And Jacob, you shared the moment where you unexpectedly were in a military zone near Mount Ararat and then taken in at gunpoint with the Turkish police and interrogated for hours to make sure you weren't a spy. I heard that story and I thought, wow, that can't be something that could be replicated again. And then all of a sudden you've come up with this story which has got... the idea that people with machetes and everything are sort of discussing your fate, so to speak, on the road. I have no words for this. I cannot even comprehend what you were feeling in that moment. We talked about when you've reconsidered travelling like this, when you've been sick and, you've had illness or injury. Once that moment passed, did you have reconsiderations again, or did you sort of feel, well, it can't get worse than that, I'm going to keep going?
Would like to mention the what I was feeling part real quick. For that one, it was actually dark and I was tired from a long day of riding. I was like, "Oh, just hurry up and decide so I can go to bed." I was kind of annoyed at the situation. Like, I'm trying to sleep. Just leave me alone so I can sleep. Leave me alone. But later on, I guess the gravity of the situation really hit. At that point, I partly decided that I wasn't going to cycle up West Africa just because that area, especially in the Congos, Angola, those areas tend to be somewhat more unstable. I'd heard of other people having incidents there. I'd actually decided I wasn't going to cycle up West Africa at that point. But once again, the problems of the incident kind of wore off over time. And by the time I made it to Cape Town's, however long, a month, 2 months, some amount of time later, I decided that I was definitely going to cycle up West Africa. It's kind of that funny thing of there's a saying through the mountaineering community. It's like the best mountaineers have the worst memory because they're able to forget just how terrible it is to do that. And I think that can apply to more adventurous cycling to a degree as well, just because it's a lot of type 2, type 3 fun where it just can be really quite terrible or challenging in the moment. Given enough time, that's part of the reason it becomes addicting, is just the wanting to have more adventure of some degree, that experience. And could also go into even the title of the blog, that acronym I made up of Now I Know That I'm Alive, for the title. That was kind of the impression I got when I started touring, is that, wow, I feel alive, excited, something I'm looking forward to just about every day. And kind of, I can't believe I'm getting to do this sort of thing. Just that level of excitement and zest for life is something I haven't really found very much of elsewhere.
A lot of people who travel slowly through a landscape, whether it's on a bike or, through hiking, I think that is the feeling of that gift that you give to yourself, that zest for life, that curiosity, that energizing feel from exploring new things, being out there, being in awe. And I imagine, Jacob, there's been so many times where you would have been just stood in awe, seeing sights as well, just being totally impressed, feeling so small. Have you experienced the full length of emotions there as well? Like, is it something that you've noticed in the moment? Have you ever experienced something magical that's moved you emotionally while you're out on tour, like has moved you to tears, or you've just been overwhelmed with awe as well?
Yes. Yeah, I think kind of going back to that place I mentioned, researching in Peru, just that one pass, Peru, kind of the realization of a dream, like that, realizing that actually out doing the thing I'd been working for and planning and looking forward to all along. It's just the really amazing feeling to be out there. And it's also something I've noticed with the contrast of touring solo versus touring with a partner, is that being on my own, the daily range of emotions was much higher. Like, from feeling great, like, yeah, everything's amazing, to, oh no, something bad happened, I got a flat tire or whatever. Like that, like, oh, life is terrible. And I'm like, oh, I'm at the top of a mountain pass. Look at that. Oh no, it's raining. It's bad again. And just things like that, or even just little things of having a good day and then somebody drives a little bit too close on their car and then suddenly get like an angry flare of what's wrong with that person? Why aren't they paying attention? Or why did they give me more space, kind of thing. Touring with a partner, that's been a little bit different, where it's just kind of, usually we aren't both having a very bad day at the same time. That's been helpful, just even like being able to vent and like share your feelings or just talk through whatever experience it was immediately as it's happening or immediately after the fact, is very different than doing it alone. And in that way, actually, writing it, having the blog and the journal there was quite helpful. We're just kind of a outlet for me to put my thoughts into writing, help process things a little bit better, I think, than if I hadn't done it that way.
Jacob, just listening to your stories and your experiences, I've joked so many times on the podcast, I really want to have a show called Campfire Chats, and it's not a show that's online, it's actually in person, where I get to have these conversations in the perfect scene, which is out in nature under a starry sky with a beautiful campfire. Of course, nature being nature, what that means is probably going to be windy and rainy the day that we plan it. But anyway, in my mind, these are the sort of stories that I want to hear and I want to learn from. When you're talking about the differences there, experiencing the full spectrum of the roller coaster of emotions when you're traveling solo, and traveling as a team, it's not so much of a roller coaster. It's almost that adage, a problem shared is a problem halved. I guess there's also the other side of things. You were saying, there's benefits of, often it's not the case that everyone's having a bad moment at the same time, and so one person can lift the other up. I guess conversely, there's times where that doesn't feel so good as well, and I imagine, naturally there would be times where, gosh, this would be easier if I was on my own, or, oh no, such and such isn't good, I've got to do my best now to lift the mood and lift the spirits. There's that side of travelling as a team of two that's different too, isn't it?
Yeah, somewhat. going off on your previous tangent. We'll have to let you know when we make it to wherever you are. That would be fun.
Totally invited. Campfire chats. But back to the other point, though, travelling as a team of two, there is that difference. And coupled with the fact that you're touring now with Carolyn with this different presence of mind, explore places rather than get places, I imagine that it's complementary to travelling in that way. And it's normal when there's ructions amongst two people, but ultimately you're learning new ways of a touring lifestyle as well this way too.
Definitely. It's been quite the learning experience. Things have gone generally quite well. We both have a very similar touring style and personality. Most of the time our interests align quite well, so I've been really quite lucky to have that work out as well as it has. And yeah, so the way we've been traveling with the more exploring places rather than trying to get places has actually been really helpful in just being able to readjust plans on the fly. For instance, we had thought about trying to cycle all the way down to the southern tip of India, hopefully go to Sri Lanka. There was a ferry that was unpredictable and ended up not running anyway. So good decision anyway that we didn't do that. But that was something that was creating some stress and pressure for a while, and decided to change plans on that, which of course ended up working out anyway because the ferry wasn't actually running. But having the flexibility just to be able to alter plans, like, oh, something is going wrong, maybe we don't push another however many hours to get to the next town, and instead we could just stop in this town or at the next place to camp or whatever else it may be. Even then it can come up a little bit of, we kind of have our mindsets on getting to a certain place on a given day, and yeah, things can take longer than expected. We've often been able to just readjust plans and say, like, that's not going to work today, we'll probably get there tomorrow. And sometimes it's not even tomorrow, sometimes it's been even longer than that. But yeah, it's generally worked out quite well, just with the different mentality, just not having a set plan or schedule really, more just things we want to go do and see and adjusting as we see fit. As that differs from solo touring, when I'm by myself, it's just autocracy. There's no discussion on it. It's like, oh, I want to go do this thing, I go do this thing. To ride harder, longer, or stop early, or do whatever other thing, go ride up a random hill or something because there's something to see there on my own. There's just no discussion on it, where that of course has been different, and then something to get used to and adjust to since especially before we did this big tour together, both of us were used to doing mostly solo adventures before that. So it's been a change getting used to talking about things, as you should in any good relationship, really.
Are there places that you've been to on your own that you're excited about discovering again now with your partner?
Definitely, yeah. So doing it the first time, I guess nearest predictable future is we'll probably end up spending the winter in Southeast Asia. And there's definitely more of that area I'd like to explore. Not only because it got cut short because I ended up having to fly home in March 2020 for borders being closed, but just in general to be able to experience it at different areas, of course, but hopefully just a little bit different pace and try to get off the beaten path a little bit more, or at the very least off the main roads. Some areas as best as we can.
The best experiences come on the roads where it's harder to get to as well. I have to say, and I know this is such a tangent, but whenever I think of Southeast Asia, I just think of amazing food and cuisine. Growing up in Australia, gosh, we are spoilt for choice with cuisines and restaurants from all around the world, but Southeast Asian food is something that is very popular. Thai restaurants, Malaysian, Indonesian, Vietnamese restaurants, that sort of food. And I can't do a long podcast with a guest like you, Jacob, and not talk about food. I have no knowledge on whether you fall into the camp of I eat food to sustain myself and get through each day, or whether I'm really excited about discovering new tastes and flavours and I live for discovering the food of a new place. I understand when you travel slowly through a landscape, there are places where it's so isolated. Food is very basic, and so, bread, potatoes, whatever, it's not fancy. But I'd love to hear some food experiences, if that's okay.
Definitely fall into the I enjoy food and look forward to trying everything. Yeah, interesting food experiences. Guess even just in Mexico right away, get rain tacos. So it is quite literally what it sounds like, just tacos filled with pan-cooked brain. And if you're okay with quite fatty and somewhat strong taste, they're actually pretty good. I happen to not mind that too much. Definitely aren't my first choice. I would prefer a tacos al pastor or something like that. Other ones would be, I guess, launching into another story. I was touring with another American, Jesse, while I was in Peru. And there was this one day when we were just riding through the mountains and kind of had a basic routine at that point of like, oh, it's midday, stop for lunch, and then keep riding afterwards. And this day we happened to be in a small town. I saw somebody and tried to ask, like, oh, is there restaurants around here? In Spanish, of course. And they're like, oh, come and join us. And we accidentally got ourselves invited to a big party. They were passing around just like baskets of roasted maize corn and kui. You hadn't heard of this. It's barbecued guinea pig and quite the delicacy in Peru. Quite similar to the name, it does taste a lot like pork. I ate quite a lot of kui that day. And in addition to that, after stuffing ourselves with as much roasted maize and kui as we could, we ended up being invited to drink the local alcohols with the men there. One of the ones was a beer, and the way they had the drinking set up is have like 1 liter bottles of beer, and you'd go around and you'd pour yourself a small glass and drink it quickly, and then you'd pass the glass and the bottle to the next person. That was how the drinking went around there. So go through several bottles of beer with that. Then we also got to try the locally made chicha morada, which is a purple corn wine. That one's really interesting. Trying to remember the flavor, I guess would go with the kind of standard wine flavor, but just with a bit of the earthier taste of corn. But that one is especially interesting because the way it's made, we didn't learn this until after, which was probably a good thing because we might not have tried it, but people make this purple corn wine by taking the kernels and chewing them and then spitting them into a pot and allowing them to ferment for a certain amount of time.
I do not know whether that's up my alley or not. Now, alcohol apparently kills all germs, right? But
Yeah, supposedly the alcohol takes care of the germs, but we didn't find that out until afterwards. That's how it was made. We just heard the name, like, oh, Chicha Morada. Oh, it tastes like corn alcohol. Okay, cool. Let's drink it. Continuing on with that a little bit, just because it's a fun one. We ended up drinking a little bit too much, of course, and continued cycling on. Luckily, there were not drunk driving rules in Peru at the time, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing for us. Hard to say. We rode on through the afternoon and happened upon a concert. Walk up to the concert and they're like, oh, look, white people on bicycles. Yeah, come on in. So they saw us and pushed us past the big line of people queuing to get into the concert. We sat out onto the grass and listened to the music on the concert for a couple hours while we sobered up. And then rode into the next town where we ended up asking at a police station if we could camp and just camping outside of a police station for the night. Continuing on with food, one of the big highlights around the world was definitely Ethiopian food. Getting to Ethiopia. Ethiopia is a little bit legendary for cycling. High incidences of people throwing rocks and also quite a lot of aggressive yelling, but much of that is just part of the culture and people are actually quite friendly as far as I was able to tell otherwise. But highlight there was definitely the food in Ethiopia. Just anything you could get at an Ethiopian restaurant, but just the so much richer and deeper, spicier flavors than you could ever imagine anywhere else. It was also much the thing with our experience in India, where there were a few occasions where we just happened upon random places, and like sometimes it was just random food stall on the side of the road, and it's like, wow, this is amazing. This is some of the best food we've ever eaten. And other places, one would be just Dharamshala randomly, where we were climbing up a hill to go see the monastery where the Dalai Lama lives. Many of the hotels were full and just ended up at this small hotel quite close to the monastery. And they were like, wow, you cycled up that hill? That's amazing. Yeah, come on, stay here. And just the meal we had at that hotel, we have a list going now of the most amazing food in the world. And that one helped us add a lot to it. It's just really incredible food. I have to give the names now. Butter chicken is very high on the list.
Yum! I love butter chicken. I'm sorry, I'm salivating hearing about all this different food. What else is on the list?
Yeah, same here. Malay kofta is another one. What else? Do you want to pull up the list? Butter chicken. Tandoori chicken. Kebabs in India. Kind of another story. I think it was the when we had our first major incident with Giardia in India. Was just Carolyn felt very very sick one morning. We got to cycle 40 kilometers to hopefully get to the next town where there might be a hotel. Get to that place, and there was no hotel there, unfortunately. But go into the pharmacy, and we meet the pharmacist there. He's like, "Oh, what's wrong with you?" Like, "Oh, she's very sick. We need help. We need to try to get some medicine, and we're going to try to keep going." He's like, "Oh no, no, you have to rest here." Brought us some food, and then tells us afterwards, like, "Oh, you're very sick. You need to rest. I don't have anywhere you can stay here, but my friend is just down the road, and I called him, and you can stay with him." It was just this person who was in the area on an assignment with developing some of the local schools in the area, and he's like, "Oh yeah, come stay with me." Opened up his place to us, gave us what had a room with some beds we could rest on for the day, and ended up feeling a lot better. And then just as it was getting dark, like, "Oh, it's time for dinner. Come out and eat dinner." Had just some of the most amazing chicken kebabs I've ever eaten there at this guy's place, and also an eggplant curry that was they'd taken the eggplants or aubergines and roasted them in the fire, and then I think steamed them in a pressure cooker or something for some amount of time. But just I never knew eggplant could be so amazing. It just had like that really rich, smoky flavor. Really amazing, memorable experience. Incredibly kind hosts.
This is like the best food segment ever. It's been great. And I'm looking forward to hearing all of your list later. Like, I think you've listed chicken 3 or 4 times there. So that must be like your favorite type of meat. I'm going to ask you something now. And I realize you've already shared so many days and so many moments. You've even shared a day of your trip for a special little segment. But I do want to draw on the fact that you have had hundreds of days on this world tour of yours. And I want to find out, I want you to take me to one of those days and describe what happened on that day, what you were doing, where you were. You can choose it, but take me and the listeners there. Tell us about one day of your trip.
Oh boy, gonna have to think about this one. Before I go too far, though, I have to add one more thing from the list was a mutton Rogan Josh, which was also from Kashmir, but probably the best way to mutton I've ever had.
Oh, yum.
Yeah, really, really good. Day on tour. First one, I guess, is coming to mind would be just from this past summer last year. We were cycling in Spiti Valley in Himachal Pradesh in India. We ended up camping one night along a river, and there's great views of the mountains. Spiti Valley is quite dry, so the mountains are rocky. Get some snow and glaciers on top. And then in the valleys closer to the river, it's quite verdant and green. Really, really quite the contrast. And on this particular day, we were going to visit one of the monasteries. So get up in the morning and immediately start off with a good climb for 300 or 400 meters up to this monastery. Just picturesque, most amazing views of the Himalayas and mountains all around up there. Good solid climb to get up to the monastery. And it's just this stone mud construction building that's been up there for the last several centuries. And it's practically perched on a cliff. It's really kind of vertigo inducing. There's this one area where you can go climb up the stairs to a viewpoint and can quite literally look down the side of a cliff, 500 meters drop down to the valley below. You can see what like little farmhouses and stuff down there. Donkar Monastery above Shilling, Donkar Gompa in Spiti Valley in Himachal Pradesh, and just a really amazing ride up there and exploring the monastery, and then kept on going out after that. There's another monastery. What's the one that we went to next? Yeah, Lalong Monastery was the one after that, and then just a few miles away on really quiet dirt roads through the mountains, and just stopping by another monastery. And this one was kind of tucked away next to one of the more fertile areas, so farms and stuff growing around. Not quite the fortified one, but still just very beautiful, intricate carvings all over the place and a very peaceful setting. And then from there, followed that like another dirt path down along a river to meet up back to the main road. More just spectacular riding, views of the mountains all day. Stopped for lunch, ate peanut butter and jelly. So quite the most amazing lunch ever. But I think we were really excited about eating peanut butter and jelly that day because that was one of the first times we'd actually had been able to find peanut butter and jelly after being in India for a few months. Stopped for second lunch in one of the villages. We took another detour out just to ride out to this other random valley, just like a dead end road along this river valley. It was through one of the national parks out there. Just really incredible views of the rocks that like folded themselves over in half over and over again. Just the patterns and like waves and whirls, circles on the rocks. It's really amazing. And then found a nice, peaceful guest house at the end of the road out there, and just going out on a detour out to explore, and probably had some kind of Indian food for dinner. Incredible mountain view with the little guest house out there too. Just a spectacular day of riding through the mountains. Great scenery, cool places to explore, and just mind-blowing rock formations.
Absolutely incredible. I can only imagine what it was like on that day. And it's funny, the first thing I thought of is the monasteries are always at the top of a climb, right? They're never in the valley. But also just how energizing it would have been to be like Spiti Valley. I've not been there, but I've seen images of it. I can imagine what that scenery is like. Even the hilarity of, enjoying peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and then finishing it with a beautiful meal. But yeah, it's exactly what bike adventures are all about. It's those sort of things that just make me, want to go. And speaking to guests like you, Jacob, it gives me an extra sense of wanderlust to pack stuff on my bike and go places. I wonder, if I was to ask you a question, reflecting back on what you've learnt and what you've seen and experienced over the last 8 years, do you feel a sense that the world is bigger than what you thought, or do you feel it's smaller in some space? And I'm not talking size, I'm just talking potentially differences.
Yeah, so with the differences, I would say much smaller than people realize. I think there's many other people who spent any amount of time traveling abroad can tell you, especially in areas that are considered unsafe by whichever governments deem to put those labels on them, is that people are really just people all around the world. The vast majority of people just want to live out their lives in peace and don't really care about whether their country holds a little bit more territory or one place or another, or land rights, or whatever other things that countries happen to be fighting over. People are just people, the same people as your neighbors across the street. The vast majority of people are just really friendly and willing to help if you ask. And of course, there are problems sometimes, as I've mentioned, other things, just people being afraid, the villagers who came to meet me at my campsite the one night, so that kind of thing. But I think a lot of that is just people being misinformed to a degree, or just being afraid for one reason or another. And I quite easily could be the ignorant foreigner in that case, because there was a civil war going on at that place. But people are people. Most people are friendly and very willing to help if you happen to ask for it.
It has really been the overwhelming message I get, especially from people who've travelled vast distances around the world in this manner. When I've spoken to guests like that, it's exactly those same sentiments that you're talking about there, Jacob. People just want to help. People want to see you do okay. The scariness that we're fed all the time isn't necessarily there. And it was said to me so early in the podcast, it was interview number 2, it was with Dr. Florence Cattell, and we were talking about fear, and especially it was in this context of traveling as a solo female, and she said she doesn't believe so much in fear. It's more bad luck, and bad luck can happen to anyone at any time. You being in the wrong place at the wrong time can have bad things happening, but more overwhelmingly, things are going to be okay. That was the message there, and I love that that's the insight that you've learnt as well. I could speak to you for like a whole podcast season and still not get into the details of everything that you've experienced, Jacob, but I do need to wrap the show up. I'm going to ask a big favour though. I know that you are on a current tour, open-ended, with your partner Carolyn. I would love to invite you back onto the show and actually go into further details with both of you. Is that something that you're open to, I'm guessing?
Yeah, definitely. That'd be fun.
Awesome. Listeners, you get to look forward to this in a few months' time. Jacob, you're in Dushanbe now. I don't know when our schedules align when you're next in internet access, but open party, who knows, maybe it might even be here in the Pyrenees, campfire chats under a starry sky. No rain or wind allowed that night. But I am going to now, Jacob, ask you the last few questions. I asked this of all my guests. The first one is, you now as a guest have a song that you can choose to be on the Seek Travel Ride music playlist. This playlist is hours long now, listeners. So if you're out for something and you want to be entertained for hours on a ride or an adventure, look it up, Seek Travel Ride on Spotify or Apple Music. But Jacob, if you could pick one song to be the soundtrack to your adventures, what song would that be?
We got to put a lot of thought into this, luckily, because it took such a long time for our schedules to align. And the final decision that I made was Could Have Been Me by The Struts. Not sure if you've heard that one.
No, I have heard it. And I'm always like when I have. So that's great.
Yeah, that one was one that resonated with me when I heard it, where it's just kind of going for it. Which, if you look back on my life, I think that makes sense.
I always like it when guests pick a song and it's something that resonates with them. It's not so much, this was on this particular day and that's why I've picked it. If it's something that you can look at the lyrics and go, that could have been me. Literally the name of the song's title. I must actually ask, before I ask my final two questions, Jacob, if listeners want to learn more about your story, I've mentioned your blog there on Crazy Guy on a Bike. Is that the best way for them to find out more? Are you online at all?
Yeah, the blog is on there, and it's not active anymore, so that would mostly be the backlog of all the adventures from my world tour from 2016 to 2020. Also wrote a book, Until the Road Ends. It's available on Amazon, and it's the one with me on the recumbent bike crossing the Salar de Uyuni in Bolivia. I was looking at it recently, just trying to make sure it was still showing up, and it's not the one with the unicorn on it, so if you see that one, it's the wrong one. Also, posting on Instagram, occasional _bikepacker, kind of a little bit of a jab at the terminology war, but that's a different discussion.
We can all be friends.
Yes. Absolutely. And it's currently set to private. So if you look me up, try to send me a message with Seek Travel Ride, and chances are you'll get accepted to join the exclusive community of people who follow me on Instagram.
I love that I'm one of those exclusive people. So if you get to follow Jacob, we're all sort of like 1 degree of separation apart. By the way, just, unashamedly, if you're not already following Seek Travel Ride on Instagram, do so. Our handle, @Seek Travel Ride. So it's pretty easy to find us too. All right, Jacob, definitely time to wrap this first session with you up. Last two questions, very quick ones. I ask it of all my guests. You'll know what's coming up. First one, you have a choice to make one day. One time you can choose and you'll be going forever up a constant, never-ending hill climb. I'm going to say it's off-road, dirt, it's going to be a hill climb that requires you to be in your most easy spinning gear all day long. The other option is you can choose to go a total different direction. You won't have that never-ending hard hill climb, but you will have an unrelenting headwind. Which one are you going to choose?
Hill climb, no question. I've had a few of those days, always memorable.
Listeners, it doesn't matter how I phrase this question, hill climb's winning all the time. It's a rare diamond in the rough that chooses the headwind, Jacob, so That's nothing on you. I'm Team Hill Climb as well. And I've tried every which way of making the headwind sound more appealing, but people still choose the climb. What's the main reason for you on the hill climb?
I think we need to upgrade it and say it's a hike-a-bike hill climb in the snow or something like that. But I'd probably still choose the hill climb because I've done that too. Yeah, I guess hill climb, there's the perception of there being a reward. I mean, let's even say it's foggy and there's zero visibility, and I'll probably still choose the head climb or the hill climb. Endless headwinds. Those ones are some of the hardest days I've had. I've had a good few of those, and they haven't been days I've particularly enjoyed. I've definitely had the days where I've spent all day climbing up the roughest terrain and poor weather or otherwise. It's just always felt like a good day at the end of the day, where the headwinds are more just drained and tired and feel like I put a lot of effort in and didn't go anywhere. Even if I could have easily gone 10 times the distance of our snowy, terrible hill climb.
Well, there's no changing your mind. Team Hill Climb. And you know what? I'm with you there. Although I'm not sure if it's really foggy, hike-a-bike. You know, maybe I would choose the headwind on that maybe one day of the year, but only if the headwind was, maybe if I'm in the headwind in like the most amazing valley view of the hills that I could be climbing instead. Absolute final question, Jacob. You are given the choice one day. You're only cycling for 4 hours. Time is irrelevant here though. Would you choose to cycle on your own or to cycle with other people? Which one are you going to choose?
I think I'll go with on my own this time, switch it up. Variety's all right. Definitely enjoy cycling with other people, especially Carolyn. She's sitting right across the room from me. Wouldn't mind picking solo for a day, even if it's just a silly day ride into the hills. But I don't know. It'd have to be really quite silly to not be able to get Carolyn to go on it.
Well, can I just say I am super excited. I know this took a long time to get our schedules to line, but I'm already excited at the idea that I get to speak with both of you for the next session and to really dig deep down into the details of this current tour of yours. You're in Dushanbe in Tajikistan now. Bets are off as to where you'll be when we connect next. But Jacob Ashton, it has been an absolute pleasure. I have gone on an amazing journey with you. The experiences that you've recalled have had me mouth wide open, hands on head multiple times. Your food recollections have had me salivating. Maybe not the guinea pig though, or the brain tacos. But can I just say, I think one of the best takeaways I've had is the idea that you have evolved the way that you tour for so much now. You've toured for the last 8 years, and that evolution, what you've changed, the things you're doing, the fact you started solo, now you're with your partner. And I love most, and I've said it over and over, that idea that you are going to explore places rather than get places. I love it so much. I'm going to take it on board myself. I know this resonates with so many people. All of which to say, Jacob Ashton, thank you so, so much for sharing your stories and experiences on the podcast here with Seek Travel Ride.
Thanks for having me, Bella. It's been fun. And yes, also looking forward to the next one.
Well, listeners, I really hope that you enjoyed that session there. I hope you could appreciate the sort of topics that we covered. I wanted to go beyond the generic point-to-point, tell me about your route, what was this country like to experience. Rather let Jacob come up with the experiences to match those questions as well. Fair to say, a lot of his stories absolutely had me speechless. And I am pretty thrilled to be able to sit down with him in the future and with his partner Carolyn, and to also dig into the details of their current adventure as well. Now, if you are enjoying Seek Travel Ride, have you signed up to the Seek Travel Ride newsletter yet? It comes out every month and it's full of great information like a preview of who the guests to come on the show are going to be, news from our community, some news from previous guests, as well as ways that you as listeners can get more involved with Seek Travel Ride as well. To sign up, it's pretty easy. Check out the show notes in this episode and hit the newsletter sign up link, and you will be able to get Seek Travel Ride news delivered straight to your inbox every single month. Until the next episode, I'm Bella Malloy. Thanks for listening.